Kia ora, everyone. So, welcome,
Kia ora.
Aaron.
Kia ora.
Welcome, Rogers. Thank you for joining us today. So, I know we've got you in to talk a little bit about the homelessness problem in Auckland. So, I figured just for everyone at home, would you like to maybe just introduce yourself a little bit and, what Kickback and the front door is and kind of just let the people know what you do?
Yeah, kia ora. Ko Aaron Hendry toko ingoa. I'm a youth development worker. I run Kickback, which is a youth development organisation that's responding to youth homelessness. We have we do a few different things. Really focus on where there are gaps in the system for our young people and try to design services that meet those young people's needs. We do a lot around child advocacy and organising around youth homelessness and trying to ensure that we have a response to it. One of our key services at the moment is called the front door. So it's kind of like an outreach drop-in crisis centre for young people to drop in, get support. We do a lot of work just kind of monitoring and building community for young people that are unhoused, and then doing work to sort of support them to get access to their needs, right? So a young person could turn up in the front door, have nowhere to go. We'd start advocating for them to either get them into emergency housing or into transitional housing and build like a community housing plan. But then also, like, we have partners like Youth Law that are with us every week, and so they can get access to legal advice, or CADs, or ease up and get mental health and addiction support, or we're working with our local PHO to have a kind of a youth health clinic based on site as well. So basically, the idea is, instead of going to 1,000 doors to get support, a young person can just turn up, and then we do the work of bringing those services to them so they can just get what they need. Big part of what we believe is that there is a better way to develop services for young people. So this service was designed by a group of young people that said, hey, we've experienced homelessness and the system didn't work for us. So how could we build something that could work for our friends and for those coming through? And so that's kind of one of the cool and unique things about our service, is that it's been built by Rangatahi and it's continued to be developed by young people. Like, they kind of tell us what they want to use the space for, and we kind of grow it from there, which has been really cool.
Wow, that's honestly sounds amazing. It actually almost kind of reminds me, like, when I was a kid, uh, back in the early 2000s, we had a smaller kind of similar thing where our church would, like, feed people
Yeah.
on a Friday night. Kids had a good space to go
Yeah.
so that they weren't out causing problems. So it's amazing that you guys are doing that, but really sad that you guys have to be the one to kind of be the people to do that.
Yeah, it's. I mean, part of the project started because after years of kind of advocate, I've been a youth worker since I was a teenager myself. Right, I've worked in the housing and homelessness space for much of my career so far in the community, and there've been years of advocating for solutions around that sort of crisis emergency space, because outside of this service, there hasn't really been a central service that young people can go to when they experience homelessness. So, like, a lot of our young people tell us, that first time when they get, they have had to leave home, and they're not knowing where to go, and they're sleeping at parks or under benches or like out in the cold by themselves, and just the trauma and the
Mm.
fear of that, right? Like, how do you get that
Oh,
support? For our adult whānau, we have these larger kind of identifiable services like the mission, or others, and sometimes our young people don't feel safe going into those spaces, or they don't even see themselves identified in those spaces, so then they don't
mm,
go. And so, our rangatahi told us that it's really important they have a service that they see themselves represented in, that they feel safe in, that they can go to. And so that's been like a real big focus for us, is building that space. And a lot
mm,
of what we do is probably just about building community, building relationships. And we believe in, universal access to support, right? Like, that people's basic human needs shouldn't be something you have to go through a whole bunch of tick boxes to get through, So you think the comparable services right now, like work and income, right? You walk in the door and there's so many barriers to support. You've got to justify yourself and prove that you need to get access to
mm.
food or to clothing or to a roof over your head. We believe that all you should have to do is turn up, and if you've got a need as a community, we'll work together to fill it. So that's, I guess, what we try to do. The cool thing about the front door for me is that it's all about community and kotahitanga, right? So Kickback is very lucky to have, blessed to have so many partners. We work with Common, who rescue clothing and provide us with a lot of really good, like, quality clothing, or Sunday Blessings, who do a lot of food rescue in the city centre, and filter food to us through their partnerships with Woolworths and the like. And so, yeah, it's really about the community coming together and providing a response to the needs of our rangatahi and serving together, which is really cool.
Yeah, and that partly actually goes into a question I did have, is sort of what's something that just the average everyday person can do to help contribute to solving these issues, do you think? What's the
Yeah,
best way for us to help?
Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest things around youth homelessness right now. So about 50%, and this has been a stable figure in census data for us probably 2016. I think it goes back as 2014 since we started really recording, maybe even longer. 50% of those experiencing homelessness in Aotearoa are rangatahi, right? So under 24, right? Young people and children. That's been a stable figure for such a long period of time. And when we talk about homelessness, our young people often get neglected. Their voices aren't often heard, and strategies that have been developed have excluded them. Um, One of the big challenges we have right now is actually the political will to solve this issue, right?
Mm,
And that takes, I guess, us as a community starting to see how outrageous it is that we have a situation in New Zealand where children can end up sleeping on the street because they can't get access to support. Because as a community, we haven't funded the right public services to ensure that we can support these young people and these children, and that our services aren't even accessible to our young people and our kids, resulting in people sleeping on the street in the worst cases, which I think we'll talk about soon with the emergency housing stuff. But the reality is this has been an issue that's been long standing. It's been going on for generations, right? And one of, I guess, our senses that until as a community we find this completely outrageous and unacceptable, it won't change. And so our political leaders need to have a clear understanding that Aotearoa New Zealand wants urgent and critical immediate action on youth homeless, on tamariki homelessness. And we want a clear strategy which the people of New Zealand are going to keep our governments accountable for to actually start resolving this. And so, like, a real tangible action we can all be doing is emailing our local MPs, meeting with our local MPs and just outlining that this is a problem, sharing, follow groups, like Kickback and others that are doing work on youth homelessness, share those comms, share those stories, talk to your neighbors, talk to your friends, and, put some public pressure on our elected leaders to act. Because we're kind of in a moment where obviously there's issues with our government, and we'll talk about all of those. But actually, there's no government that has done enough to solve and resolve youth homelessness. And I think a lot about, hey, if this was my child, what would I be doing? Like, I'd be
mm.
screaming it from the rooftops that they were in this situation. I couldn't get support for them. Well, these were all of our kids, right? So as a community, what are we doing about it? I think it's one of those big scandals in New Zealand that really we don't pay enough attention to, or we haven't yet. So, I mean, tangibly, that's one small thing that people can be thinking about.
Yeah, and talking to your local representative is probably actually a good idea. In fact, I think that's a course of action a lot of people sort of overlook, especially when a lot of the focus is on group protests, stuff like that. Just individually reaching out to your local MP, just let them know what you think about what's going
Yeah,
on in your society, your community.
I'll tell you, and that's a kind of, one of the values we have in New Zealand around our democracy is we're actually really close to our elected officials, and you have the ability, especially your local MP, to reach out to them, build a relationship with them, and regardless of what political persuasions they are, actually tell them what you think, and that's their job, is
Mm.
to listen, and whether they agree with you or not. That pressure of, hey, this is something that really matters to me, and the more people that are doing that, it builds pressure and it builds up, right? And so, yeah,
Mm.
public protests, signing petitions, that's all part of it. But a real tangible thing we can do is, put pressure on your local MP and let them know that you really care about this issue and you want, whatever party or government they're a part of to, to do something about it.
Yeah,
And
I just wanted to
sorry.
quickly pick up on something else that you said. I think it's really important, that attitude kind of point that you made, because I think the attitudes and values that we hold kind of seem to be a problem along a lot of things that should be maybe
Mm.
bipartisan issues, like, children being homeless or feeding children or housing anyone. So I think
Yeah.
that's a really good point to kind of maybe encourage people to try and help others change their attitudes, because I definitely see that being an increasing problem, is that
Yeah.
there's some negative attitudes that are starting to grow.
Yeah, and and I think there's a fundamental question for us as Aotearoa New Zealand. Like, what do we really value? Who do we really value in society, and what sort of
Mm,
country do we want to live in? Right? Do
mm,
do we want to live in a country where all of our people have access to their basic human needs, where we can all thrive together? Do we want to live in a country where our young people are given the care and the support that they need to do well, to chase their dreams, to succeed in their life? And if that's the sort of country we're interested in, then we need to be ensuring that we are building, the right public services, the right supports, the right infrastructure in our society to care for our people and to care for our most vulnerable children and young people. And I think actually, and again, we're in this real polarized moment in society, in the world at the moment. But I think one-on-one, when you speak to a lot of people, it actually holds a lot of those shared values. And I think when you talk to people, that idea that we live in a society right now where a 16-year-old can actually go to a government service, ask for support, be told we can't help you because of X, Y, or Z, and be then turned away to sleep on like Queen Street or on K Road,
Yeah.
like that's pretty deplorable, right? That's outrageous. That just it blows your mind that that could happen in a country like New Zealand. And I think it's not a left right issue. I think in a human level, that's something we can all recognize is really, really wrong, and we should be resolving it.
Also, I think just maybe just highlighting that stat you said earlier, if I wasn't mistaken, it was about half of all people winding up on the street were youth. Was that correct?
Yeah, about 50% of all those experiencing homelessness. The way New Zealand defines homelessness, yeah, it's sleeping rough, it's couch surfing, it's living in abandoned buildings, it's living in transitional housing and kind of moving around a lot. It's living in emergency housing. So that's kind of a broad definition. So that 50% includes children and young people. Some will be with their whānau and some will be living independently. So we don't in New Zealand do a good enough job of tracking deep into that data, but 50% of unhoused or young people experiencing housing deprivation and housing insecurity, that's huge. That's really
That's
big. And
shocking.
as a country, we need to think,
Yeah.
what is going on there, and why do we not have a strategy to actually address and resolve youth homelessness and urgent action being taken to make sure that this is resolved?
And
That's
I
been
think that
stable
just makes
for too long.
Yeah, and some of these statistics that are coming out this week, I think are just worsened by that fact. 50% rise in Auckland people on the streets. About half of that's going to be youth, isn't it? Would be a fair assumption.
Yeah, potentially. I haven't seen the breakdown of the data around the sleeping rough perspective. The young people's experience is often a lot different in that they move around quite a lot, so they don't always turn up in those sort of data counts, and they're often harder to pin down. So they'll be sleeping rough, then they'll be couch surfing, then they're moving around, and so they often don't turn up in the data, which is one of the reasons why we call it hidden homelessness, rangatahi homelessness. But yeah, the 52%. So the council wrote a letter, I think it was this week, to the government saying that we need urgent support. We've had a 52% increase in those sleeping rough or out on the street since the government's reforms began, so 3-4 months ago, however long ago now. It really highlights the fact that homelessness exists because of political decisions we make. That sharp increase can be very directly tied to decisions this government has made, which has made things a lot harder for people and made things a lot difficult. Just before we kind of go into the detail on that, though, just to finish that last point, that the existence of that 50% of young people and children sleeping, experiencing homelessness, and how long that's been going on shows that this is not just a national issue. This is not just an ACT issue. It's an issue that actually all governments have neglected. We haven't cared enough about our kids. We haven't cared enough about our young people. And under the Labour government, this number was pretty persistent as well. And under the National government before then, it also was persistent. So, we need to actually, regardless of who's your party, we need to be holding them to account and saying, actually, our kids matter, and we demand urgent action on this. And whether it's Labour going in, the next election or this government now, we need to see that you are putting some real clear objectives in place and you're moving at pace to resolve this, to borrow some of the terminology from the current government.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree, because that's the thing is, like, I think what really is got me thinking is that if we can do the interventions for homelessness when they're young, that means that we're going to help prevent other things when they're older, because I imagine homeless teenagers might end up being struggling adults who don't have the kind of even skills possibly. I'm also kind of thinking, like, I know that this has been a consistent trend, but also a lot of our youth at the moment, I think all of them went through the pandemic, which has also had psychological effects on our young people and a lot of flow-on effects. Like, have you noticed differences in the issues that maybe like youth used to have versus kind of what this new batch has had to deal with?
Yeah. First, that point around the intervention. So a lot of our adult whānau that have experienced homelessness long term, they'll tell you that their experience of homelessness began when they were young, right? A lot of the
Mm,
teenagers and the young people that we work with and we serve will tell us that their experiences began when they were kids, so they were first sleeping rough at 9 or 10 or 11. So Kickback, we're already seeing children. I think our youngest we've had walk into our hub has been 9 years of age,
oh,
11, 12, who are already starting to sleep rough or experience homelessness at that young age. So again, like there's real issues in terms of the way we are resourcing our system and our service to design solutions for these children and intervene really early. And if we could intervene at that much earlier age, we could be ensuring that there's support in place for them, and we actually disrupt the pathway into homelessness. So,
mhm,
especially that younger age group, some of these issues around we don't have a child and protection service that is funded to be able to meet the needs of these children. So, Orang Tamariki has been significantly underfunded. The child welfare system has been significantly underfunded probably forever, right? It's never
mm,
been built to really respond to these needs. And so there's real issues there. In terms of that point around COVID, um, look, I think a lot of the issues probably are similar. A lot of the challenges around disconnection. I think there's probably from the lens what we work with the young people that experience homelessness, a lot of those breakdowns and lack of community and trust, and all of that stuff was already there. I think we've probably seen another group of children and young people that, because of that, have become more vulnerable um,
mm,
due to those. So all these concerns we had around there was a tiny spike in youth crime just coming out of COVID. Well, it was
mm,
really to be expected because a lot of those pro-social activities that you had a whole, group of kids who would have got involved with their local sports club. They would have,
mm,
gone down and, been the rugby team and, been at dance and drama and like doing all this like cool stuff, which would have
mm,
grounded them and stabilized them and been a huge protective factor in their lives. Well, none of that existed for a few years. So there's
yeah.
really important times where as friends, they would have been building these really healthy social networks. They couldn't do that. And then coming out of
Mm,
that, for some of them, they were already disconnected, and so there's been those challenges there. So, yeah, there's definitely increases around inequality and access to safe, supportive communities and the sort of support our children need to thrive. And things seem to be getting a lot more difficult for our kids, and it's not just our kids; it's our whānau, right? And I think that's the point we have to continue to remember that our children are part of communities and a part of whānau, and often the resources in our community to even hold and heal our kids and to look after them are really shredded and torn, and part of that is
mm,
because of political decisions we continue to make to allow poverty to persist and to allow people to live in substandard housing and to deny people their basic right to shelter. And all of these things impact on our kids and have a real impact on their lives and their quality of life.
There's
absolutely.
there's been a bit of a talk about the housing emergency housing wait list as well. Are you aware of any of the people that have come and may have been affected by that?
Yeah, so the emergency housing system, quite it all. Look, first thing to say around emergency housing is it's never been a solution. Like I'm pretty on the record of saying that I thought that emergency housing, kind of as a model, the way it's been designed and the way it's been used over the last decade, has basically sustained homelessness. Right, it's pushed some of our most vulnerable people into really poor, unsheltered, shelter.
Mm,
It has
Interesting.
funneled like millions of dollars of public money into the back pockets of private moteliers
mm,
who have exploited some of our most vulnerable people, right? So it is a huge moral failure for society.
mhm,
And there is no one in Parliament right now that has their hands clean of that, right? So both of our major parties have overseen that system and we're a part of it.
mm,
Um, what the last government should have done and they failed to do was build an alternative model, right? So it's great that you have a roof over the head, but the government could have taken far more responsibility and should have taken far more responsibility to ensure people were going into some form of a higher standard of shelter, that they were actually designing services and supports and for that immediate crisis point. So if someone needed somewhere to go, they could go there, they were safe, they were cared for, and plans could be put in place around their stable housing. That
mm,
wasn't done. They used the motel model as a result. So yes, we definitely needed to move away from this emergency housing motel model. And when the National came in, to their credit, they said some of the right things. They said, "Look, this has been a failure. People have been hurt. They've been suffered. They've been exploited. We need to do something different. It's not working." And what we had hoped they would have done, and what they should have done, was started to build an alternative model underneath the emergency housing motel model that they currently had in place. And that would have looked like something that, at least the standard of shelter would have been, good quality. There would have been support available. Someone could go there in a moment of crisis and start to get the support to develop a plan over the next 24 to 48 hours and gradually support people into the next step in the housing journey, whether that's transitional housing or stable housing. That would have been the responsible thing to have done. Instead, what this government has done is basically just shut the doors. So they have been saying a lot around how we have, dropped the numbers around emergency housing, and we've moved these kids out of motels into homes. And now, look, that's a good thing. We acknowledge that, right? It's really good that there's been some prioritization around getting children into housing as swiftly as possible. That's positive. But on the other side of it, they have made it harder to access. They have made more rules around sort of like if you're responsible for your own homelessness, you can't access it. They've created barriers. So like if something goes wrong behaviorally or, whatever, they have this behavioral metrics, which to be honest, we don't really understand because we haven't been able to see it. It basically says that like if you don't live up to our expectations, we can cut it off and then it's 13 weeks before you can reapply. They've made it so difficult that you can't really get access to it. Now, the Minister, Tama Pōtaka, and the Prime Minister both say, look, you can still get access to emergency housing if you need it. But the reality on the ground, what we see and what our young people experience is that it's near impossible to get access to emergency accommodation. It might happen every once in a while, but I have absolutely no confidence that even with an advocate, we could get support for someone and get them into emergency housing tonight if they walked in the door in 5 minutes, right? That is, that's kind of the situation we're in. And as a result, what Kickback's saying and what I think is reflected around the country, and I'm seeing a lot of my colleagues both in Wellington and in other places saying similar things. We're literally seeing people going in, asking for support, being denied. Often these experiences are traumatizing. Young people report to us that they feel gaslit, they don't feel believed, they feel traumatized by the experience. They feel blamed for the experience. Often they've been a victim of some form of harm and they've been blamed for their circumstances, and they've been being denied support and turned away to either go back to an abusive and dangerous situation where they're couch surfing and their lives are unsafe, or they've been turned away to go sleep on the streets. And homelessness is something I think we don't fully appreciate in New Zealand is how dangerous it is to experience homelessness in this country. And now, by not even being able to get into emergency housing, which is the bare minimum, it is pretty poor. But the fact that we can't even get that now is sleeping on the street and staying in that condition. It's even worse, right? So when young people are being turned away from MSD, they're going back into their unstable situations, whether it's a dangerous and abusive living environment where they're couch surfing or on the street or in their car. And often they're reporting to us, instances where they're being abused, where they're being harmed, where they're experiencing some really, intense stuff. And their lives are literally at risk in some cases. And there's also an impact on kind of their mental health and, a risk around suicide and other harm that comes out of that. So, yeah, it's been really concerning. And that speaks to, I think, the 52% increase in people sleeping rough, which the government is not paying attention to. Is all part of that. So, if you walk around Auckland City, there is definitely a feeling that there's more people experiencing homelessness. There's more people sleeping rough, and we're seeing that in our service, and I know others are seeing it as well.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I actually have been in WINS and watched not only young people get turned away, but a man who had just gotten out of prison who was like trying to do, like you say, jump through all their hoops and steps, only to be basically told that it's his fault he's in this position and he should have just gotten here earlier, even though he had tried to go through multiple avenues before coming back. And so, like, I have definitely seen that. And that was only maybe a month ago.
And this is the thing. So if you've got a system that relies on advocates to work, it doesn't work, right? That is not a system that's person-centered or designed to support our people. Literally right now, one of my youth workers is at Work and Income trying to support 2 young people to get into housing, and we've done all the work for them. We've found somewhere for them to go. We've got the landlord to accept it. We've basically just all week been trying to get MSD to process some paperwork. Now, that is required, basically the resources of my whole team to advocate to the system to try to push through something that should be just really simple. These young people wouldn't be able to do it by themselves. Now that shows us that it doesn't work. It's not designed to support our people, and people are getting hurt as a result. One of the things Kickback has been calling for since this week we called for a review of MSD and their application of the emergency housing policy, because right now there is a situation where someone who's vulnerable, who's in danger, whose life is being threatened, who is unsafe, could walk into work and income, share their guts out, tell their story, get really vulnerable, and then be told, sorry, we can't help you, come back on next week and we'll book an appointment to start talking about options. Well, look, that's fairly ridiculous. People are getting hurt because of that. So we need to have a review of that. We need to understand, why is that happening? What are the internal policies? What are the internal practices, and what's going wrong there to lead to a situation where people are getting hurt so significantly because of the policy that has been implemented by the government.
And at the end of the day, the basic math just doesn't seem to add up. Some hard stats from the Auckland Council website: 885 applicants were reduced to 39 from 2023 to 2024. That's a decrease of 95%. Yet we've had an increase of homelessness in 50%. So it doesn't seem to add up to me.
And it's important to recognise that. So, one of the comments that was made, I think it was a question from Chloe Swarbrick that prompted the response from the Prime Minister to say, hey, this government's working at pace, we're doing a really good job on homelessness. Well, the reality is just not in step with that, right? So obviously the emergency housing thing, that's the most visible thing. And it's a real clear reminder that decisions made in Wellington have a real direct impact on our lives, right? And we're experiencing that right now. Many of our most vulnerable whānau and young people are experiencing that. And actually any of us could experience that today because of other policy decisions that have been made. For example, no-cause evictions. Look, we know very clearly that no-cause evictions create increased risk of homelessness for all of us, right? If you're a renter, your risk of homelessness has increased because of this. Lack of public housing. So this government has stalled public housing builds, and it doesn't look like they're going to be developing some developments that have been put in place. So that's slowed down our public housing build. That's put more pressure on the system, which means our most vulnerable people get shoved down to the bottom of the list. Our young people specifically are no longer as prioritized. The homelessness action plan, which had huge gaps in it, there needs to be a lot of work. That's been basically gutted by this government. This government in their last budget cut $20 million that was going to go into youth services that would have provided housing for young people experiencing homelessness. Now, $20 million was a drop in the bucket to the actual need that we have, but it was more than what we have right now, which means there are young people that would have been housed in housing services that would have existed if that money had been spent that got gutted. So, there's a whole range of policy decisions that this government has made, which has taken us backwards in terms of our response to homelessness. Getting rid of the Minister of Homelessness, that was a sign, if ever there was one, that there wasn't going to be a focus on homelessness from this government. So, claims that the government is progressing an agenda to end and reduce homelessness are just unfounded. And unfortunately, the evidence is pointing in the opposite direction.
Absolutely. I know here in Wellington, we have so many empty buildings that people are always calling on to be actually repurposed so that we can have extra homes, because not only do our homeless need houses, just people in general need houses in Wellington, since there's quite a shortage. So, yeah, it's really disappointing to see consistent underinvestment in the future of our homeless.
Yeah. Totally, and it's important to acknowledge that actually I don't think we've had a government that's done enough, right? The last government could have done a lot more, and we can say that. But actively, right now, our current coalition government is taking us backwards. And I think as a country, we need to decide, what do we want? Do we want to have a society in a world where some of our most vulnerable people could sleep on the street? Do we want to have a society where actually any one of us, if we're renters, can be turfed out of our home, and suddenly our lives could be uprooted and our kids' lives could be uprooted? Is this the sort of society we're trying to build? Is this what we want as a country? Is this the equitable, just society that we present to the world? I don't think it is, regardless of whether you voted National or not. I think we can do a lot better for our people.
Absolutely. I guess just to kind of bring it all together a bit, is there any kind of maybe policy changes, or even just something that you would like to see kind of be the first lots of change to kind of actually tackle this problem right now? Because I think that urgency, it does seem like something needs to happen sooner rather than later.
Yeah. Look, Kickback's calling for several things at the moment, right? So the first is that the government rolls back their emergency housing reforms. We need an immediate and urgent review of the Ministry of Social Development to understand how this policy is being implemented and why it is that vulnerable people, people in crisis, people at risk of harm can walk into work and income and be turned away to walk on the street. We need to have the emergency housing reforms rolled back until the public has confidence that people aren't being harmed by this policy. And right now, the confidence isn't there. And the government needs to expedite work on duty to assist legislation, right? So there's a campaign, a petition you can sign. You can go to Action Station, duty to assist, or you can go to the link in the bio at Kickback Make Change on Instagram. Basically, duty to assist is legislation which would clarify the responsibility of state agencies to ensure that if someone walked into work and income, there would be an obligation and accountability for that agency to do all they could to prevent that person from experiencing homelessness and to support them into stable housing. So duty to assist has been trialled over in Wales. It came in first in 2014. When it came in place, there was a dramatic decrease in homelessness because their housing authorities started to do a lot of work around prevention. They started to actually support people and ensure that actually we prevented people from experiencing homelessness and were able to stay in their housing. And then they also started to develop really good data of where the system was failing, which has given the government some good information they can start responding to. So right now we need to ensure that our government agencies are accountable and that, if you're vulnerable, if you're at risk and you walk into a public service, that they have a responsibility to either refer to MSD or to provide you with an immediate response. So that's one thing that we think is really important and needs to happen. Alongside that, or beneath that, there needs to be a really urgent and critical strategy into addressing tamariki and rangatau homelessness, which really looks at all the pipelines into homelessness for our young people and starts to have some real clear actions around what's going to be done to prevent homelessness for young people and also end youth homelessness in Aotearoa altogether. These are all things that could be done. They're fairly achievable, and some of them could happen today if Minister Louise Upston or Minister Tama Potaka decided they wanted to implement them. But that emergency housing policy could be rolled back over a phone call to MSD this afternoon.
Wow. Okay, well, that's interesting because that's just got me thinking. We've had a bit of conversations through BHN a bit over the last week or so about the children's rights. It seems like a lot of these services should really fall under the actual guidelines we have for children's rights here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. So it's really interesting that you say that. And I mean, I will make sure that we definitely share as many links as we can to get those resources out to everyone. And I just also want to say thank you. Thank you for being one of the people that is actually doing the mahi to help people, even though I imagine it's more challenging than it should be for you guys. So just shout out to you and everyone for doing that mahi and looking out for our kids, even though I shouldn't have to and you shouldn't have to. So
kia ora. And like Kickback, we really believe it's about kotahitanga, right? So it's community, and I think it's been again, we're in this moment where it's really easy to feel disempowered and like we don't have control. But like my hope is in us, right? As community, we have so much more power. We don't have to wait for the government to fund something or the government to do something before we act. As a community, we have the power to organize, to come together and say, hey, this is unacceptable in our society. And we're going to keep our governments accountable and we're going to put pressure on them, but we ain't going to wait for them to move. We're going to move first. And that's something that we really focus on. We believe that youth homelessness is unacceptable in our society and we're not going to accept it. And that's what I guess the front door for us represents. It's community organizing. It's our community coming together and saying, how do we respond now to ensure that our tamariki and our rangatau are cared for and loved and that there's going to be a safe place for them? I think there's some amazing things just like that happening across this country right now, with people saying, hey, there's a need here and we're going to meet it and we ain't going to wait for the government. We're just going to get on and get it done.
I love that. I love that so much. Thank you so much for joining us today. And I'm sure if things keep going, I would love to talk to you in the future, hopefully with good updates, but maybe even if there's bad updates. So, thank you so much.
Kia ora. Well, thanks for having me.